And Meredith up. Sarah Lita is a school social worker. She's at Riverside and Littlebrook School, and Meredith is a school psychologist at Littlebrook School. Both of these individuals are very passionate about their work. They have gone to numerous professional developments. One in particular, they came back. I've never seen staff members so excited about a professional development as when they went to something about a year and a half ago on executive function. They took that learning and they turned it around to share with their colleagues, their child study team colleagues, but they also last year, about maybe last March, trained many of our staff members around the district in executive function. So Steve gave a great introduction. I'm going to let them come up and tell you more about it. But we also have a special education PTO meeting next Wednesday, so I invite parents to come out. Sarah and Meredith will be giving their full presentation. You get a little snapshot tonight. So come on up, ladies.
Good evening. My name is Sarah Lita, social worker at Littlebrook, Riverside, and preschool child study team.
And I'm Meredith Cook, the school psychologist at Littlebrook and also on the preschool child study team.
I have to say that Mickey and Steve stole a little bit of our thunder. This is really just to kind of wet your whistle with regards to what will be on display next Wednesday, March 8th. Which I can't believe it's March already. And just to tell you a little bit about how we came to this presentation and why we felt it was so important. I would say when I first started in this field, which is getting more and more years ago, ADHD was the big word, and then it was ADD, ADHD, and then it kind of evolved into executive functioning in the last several years. And Meredith and I, being in the roles that we are, have spent a lot of time going to a number of different workshops on executive functioning. And then we came across this workshop, which was very enlightening because it talked about executive functioning through a developmental perspective, which may mean nothing to laymen, but to us, it made so much sense. And then I stopped and thought, it made a lot of sense to me as a parent, not just as an educator, because it helped me understand how my child's brain was developing, how a student's brain was developing, and how my own brain was developing. And that understanding we thought was so rich. We thought we would combine it with the research we already knew about, our own experiences, our own knowledge, and it formed into this presentation that took on a life of its own. So Meredith will go with, what is it?
Gotcha. So just as a brief introduction to what executive functioning is for anybody who's not overly familiar, it's not academics. It's not intelligence. What it is sort of how those pieces come together. It's the shoelace, it's the conductor. It's not what you know, it's how you show it. And so there's no correlation between IQ and executive functioning. We're not talking about how smart somebody is, but we're talking about how can they pull all of their skills and talents together to really show that and to perform it and just to live it every day, because that's what it comes down to, and that's what we found as well. The definition you see on the bottom tends to be the most agreed upon research-based definition, that you're talking about a cluster of skills. And the fact that it's located in the frontal lobe, and yeah, Steve, you're right, the prefrontal cortex, very nicely done, is important because in terms of that developmental perspective, the brain is the last thing to fully develop, but the front of the brain is the true last thing to fully develop. And it's such an ongoing process. So executive functioning in general is that piece of how you pull everything together. And what the research has shown is that you can define it in anywhere from hundreds of skills to 40 to 8 or 9. And what we've found is that isolating those 8 or 9 key skills has been the most beneficial for us to wrap our brains around, for parents, and for our staff too as well.
So when we look at those first 8 or 9 skills, the first ones that come into focus are the ones that we most likely attribute to someone who would be diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. They are focus and attention, inhibition, and organization. Often they're the ones that we can most readily see, but the other ones are so much more significant in that they also factor into emotional regulation and social skills. Shift. The ability to move freely from one situation to another. We'll say someone is flexible or they're not flexible, they're rigid, ways that we describe people. It's really someone's ability to shift. Emotional control. I love this one, being a parent of a 6-year-old and 2 3-year-olds. The ability to modulate emotional responses. I'm still working on that myself, actually. But again, think of how that factors into daily living and what we can accept and not accept, and perspective taking. Initiation, the ability to begin a task or activity and then generate that idea. I would say that this is something that we see our teachers work through with a lot of our students, that a student can really do the activity or the homework or the project, but they just can't get started. Working memory, the ability to hold information in your mind. I'm not going to go too much into that one because that's usually when I turn it over to the psychologist and I pretend she knows more than I do, because that's definitely an area that she focuses on when she really tries to get at the learning of a child. And working memory helps understand what information a child is able to hold. And it is very important in how it plays out in the classroom. The other thing is, I bring these up, planning and prioritization. I think, again, I'm hoping you're looking at these set of skills and thinking to yourself, I got some, or oh my goodness, no, I don't. And I think that's a huge part of where we begin with this presentation, and how we're going to begin it when we start on March 8th, is really having a self-reflection piece of what works for you and what doesn't, what you're good at and what you're not. Because when we talk about executive functioning, as Meredith likes to point out, I'm totally stealing her thunder right now, it does start in the home, and it's a way that we can help shape these skills for our students or fill them in with strategies. And last is self-monitoring. It's the ability to monitor one's own performance and measure it against the standards of what is needed. Definitely a difficult skill, and I think one that many of us in our adulthood are still working on. And Meredith is going to tell you a little bit about why we're still working on some of these skills.
So, in talking about that developmental perspective, again, this is the slide that, as anybody who has sat through some of our presentations before, we leave this one up for as long as possible for one really, really big reason, is that if you're looking, what you're trying to find is that mature brain is those deep purples and the blues, and the areas of reds on the one end and then moving towards that green is what you're talking about, where it's not fully developed yet. And so that front piece is really the last part to develop, but the box is really where many of the executive functions lie. And what we have there is a 5-year-old brain. And what we know about the way that the brain develops is that there's a huge spurt in all of these from age 3 to 5. And then there's another spurt from 10 to 16. But if you're thinking about elementary school, you're talking about age 5 to 10. And so the fact that there's not a tremendous amount of brain growth or development, even though that sounds so contrary to everything I want to say about elementary school, there's not a huge gap in terms of that executive functioning piece. But then I think about what we ask a kindergartner to do versus a 3rd grader versus a 5th grader, and how many of those are developmentally appropriate and how different are they. And then typically Sarah and I do this presentation with another of our colleagues who has previously been at the high school, and she's very quick to point out they're not done in that teenage years. They're still really developing those skills. And then I usually say, so at 20 years old, they're putting it on here as fully developed, even 30. Like I'm just getting into the clear zone here, you know, of feeling like maybe I'm intact and functioning as well as I can be at this point. And so looking at how it develops across the lifespan and making sure that the expectations that we have for our students are appropriate for their age across each of these skills. Sarah and I'm jumping ahead a little bit to the end, but we were also a part of a group over the summer that looked at the developmental framework for executive functioning, social skills, and sort of those emotional regulation skills. And we kept trying to figure out why this didn't already exist, why there isn't a framework for what these look like across the lifespan. And it's because there's such a range in what this development looks like, is that it's hard to say at 5 versus 6 versus 7 versus 8. There's pieces of it, but you're going to have some of these things take place across that entirety of a 5-year span in a child. So this is the one we like to focus on, just to keep in mind that we're not talking huge differences from 5 to 10 or 11, but yet our expectations grow in such a paramount way over that time to make sure that we're keeping with what should be appropriate for our students.
Kristen, our third person who usually comes in, also likes to point out that teen brain, they're driving, and it's so not developed yet, which is a little scary.
So thinking about the brain then, and thinking about the presentation that we've given to staff and that we'll be presenting to parents, a lot of what we focus on is what it looks like when everything's working well. What is typical development of executive functioning? But part of our perspective, being in a school, being in special education, on the child study teams, is knowing that anything at all that affects the brain is going to somehow affect executive functioning. It could be one of those skills. It could be a variety of them. And we know about our students that they each have their own strengths, but understanding that these are conditions we see every day. 20% of children have an anxiety disorder. That's just part of it. That's something that exists within the levels of the brain. That's something that would affect their executive functioning, at least in some way. When we're talking about those differences, we're talking maturationally, structurally. Their brains are different, and you're looking at then a correlated delay in executive functioning. So if a child has a diagnosis of ADHD, some of their skills can be up to 30% delayed or 2 to 6 years behind their peers. So now go to that 10-year-old brain and think about where they were, and now put on a 30% delay, and what are we really asking children to do? And making sure that we're meeting them where they are to move them forward for where their starting point is.
Can I ask you a question before you move on? So now I know you're in special education, and I noticed that the screen that you just had showed a lot of children with learning disabilities, but children who are developing according to plan may also have executive functioning issues, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I just
Absolutely.
wanted to make that clear.
Great point.
Thank you.
So when we brought up that list, right, even our typical developing students, I'm imagining some of you see struggles with that, and these are, teachers come to us with these concerns, even though they don't have an IEP, even though they haven't been brought to INRS. So they're out there because for whatever reason, a child may be struggling, or it might be a weakness of theirs. They might not be very good with emotional regulation, but man, are they organized, focused, and attentive. And so when they're not good with their emotions, that may stand out. And there just hasn't developed because, as Meredith was saying, there's that range of time that it takes.
The other thing that's good to point out, too, that the way we structured the list for you all was just a way that it made sense to us in terms of explaining it tonight. But there's a lot of people who present that list of those top 9 skills in a different order, and it's the order that you typically see it develop. So something like self-monitoring, something like goal-directed persistence, you can call these different things. Those are among the last to develop. And then typically you see something more like sustained attention and inhibition as some of the earlier ones. If you think about when your children, not mine, first learned that delayed gratification, that's the very beginnings of executive functioning skills. So you're also going to see them develop sort of along a different trajectory as well.
And last,
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Do you find in any of these studies that there's a divergence at all in the progression across genders, or is it pretty similar across gender?
It can be a little different. I mean, female brains operate a little bit differently than male brains in general. But part of it is that you'll see the brain mature in a different way, and like some of the expression of these skills can be different. So. Middle school girls, or really that 10 to 13-year-old, a good example is that they think everybody's talking about them all the time, and that's because they're developing that self-talk and that self-monitoring skill. That's when starting to emerge there. But that's where a lot of that drama comes from, because if I'm thinking about myself all the time, surely everybody else is, right? So there is a difference in terms of what you would see emerging as an area of strength or weakness for girls and boys.
and it is slightly behind, right? Yeah. Boys are slightly behind. So where has this taken us? As Mickey had pointed out, we have done professional development, first with the child study team, and then also it was offered almost a year ago to numerous faculty members through a professional development. We did present to the Student Achievement Committee. I think that was about a year ago also. We saw you all. And then we had the development of the social, emotional, and executive functioning curriculum. That took place this summer. Meredith had alluded to it. That group was made up of counselors, teachers, child study team members, speech pathologists from the various elementary schools, and we did attempt to map out executive functioning along with social and emotional development, where we again attempted to say by the age of or at the end of third grade, this is what some of those expectations should be and ways to help facilitate those interventions or facilitate those skills. And next up, March 8th, at 7 o'clock at Littlebrook Elementary School, we will be presenting to parents. And we are extremely excited about this because, as we said before, it all really begins in the home. The development of executive functioning starts from infancy, and it really can be promoted with many strategies and interventions in the home, and expectations too of what parents have for their child as well as teachers. So we hope to see you there for the full-on performance, which will last probably about an hour plus. We also, I know, I think we were given about 15 to 20 minutes, and I think we have some time for questions if anyone wanted to ask or have us expand on anything or comment. Yes.
I actually do. We worked with my son, Aaron Shartman, last year, and he had a great experience with you, and I've sometimes polarized locally because of the whole charter school thing, but we could not be happier with the education that our 4-year-old is getting at the self-contained Riverside handicap classroom. But I wanted to ask, just, because looking, hindsight is 20/20, and Aaron was my third child, and I didn't know what I didn't know with my first. I hadn't hung around Fox schools. I didn't know that it was possible at age 3 to have the school district test your child if you started looking at things were a little off. And I wonder now, like, how differently things might have gone, and if whether I would actually be a PCS opponent if they had gone differently. And if there was a way just to do community outreach, whether it's through an ad in the paper, through mailings to preschoolers, anything like that, to say that this does exist, because some of us, as educated in communities as this is, just don't know.
So funny you should mention newspapers. This presentation has been advertised in some of our local papers, I believe. But more importantly, I think where we've tried to do a lot of the groundwork in terms of those connections and making sure is through some of the community preschools and making sure that they know that we exist and that we're there to serve your children and their children, to make sure that the services are available who those need it. So that's where I think a bulk of the work has been done already, is just trying to establish those connections.
My son was in a daycare, so he might not have.
But it is a good point too that and I think we actually have seen that as some of the community members have become more aware, we have seen a big increase in our preschool population within the last two
to 3
years or
years,
so. I mean,
yes.
we opened up a new classroom just 2 years ago, so I feel like word is starting to be spread a little bit further, but I think there's always more work that could be done.
Yeah. No, thank you, Liz.
I had a question about the curriculum framework. What's the plan for that? Is that for all students or just special education students?
So it's all students. It is a work in progress right now. So it's not a completed project. But what we really did over the summer was gather a little think tank within the Princeton Public Schools and pull lots of research together to look at those identified executive functioning skills, and then a similar number in terms of your interpersonal skills and your intrapersonal skills. So the emotional regulation, but also the social skills, to say what it should look like grades pre-K to 5. And that's where the focus has been so far. But that is what are age-appropriate expectations across that span. So general education students as well as our special education students, in terms of what teachers can expect, what parents can expect, and then along with that, if the teachers or parents do notice a difference, there's a resource guide with what interventions are appropriate. One of the big pushes just using common language for how we talk about these skills and how we can best support students. The goal from now is to take it to each of the elementary schools to start training the staff on it is really the next step, or administrators first, then staff. It is a work in progress, but it is all students.
Okay, well, that's great. So I just wanted to reiterate what you said. It's the special ed PTO is hosting it. It's tomorrow at Littlebrook. There's parking in
No,
the.
no.
Oh,
Not-
I'm sorry.
Daphne, don't
Next
do that
Wednesday,
to us.
March 8th. My mistake. It's
not
next
ready yet.
Wednesday, March 8th, at 7 to 8:30. And there's parking is available in the front and back lots, as well as on Magnolia Lane.
Yes.
But I just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware that it is, all parents can benefit from hearing what's about
yeah.
this.
Yes.
And
And our goal is to hopefully, we really hope that all the parents can take home strategies that they can use where they see their child may need a little bit extra help in a certain area. So that's really the goal for us, that you are able to walk away with strategies to use in the home.
Well, and I think this is great. Like, just going to Pat is always, we're always talking about programs that we implement that really aren't a big cost to the district, but will really have, could potentially have a huge impact. And my son personally worked with Meredith and on executive functioning, and it really, when he got to the middle school, he didn't have any trouble, with organization. And I know other children who didn't have your services, struggled with that. So I've seen personally the firsthand benefits of that. So, and again, you're bringing this to the general education population, is a big benefit that is really at a nominal cost, right? So thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I just had a question on that, too. In terms of the curriculum that you're developing, it seems to me as a parent, when I was at a middle school children or even elementary school children, a lot of these executive functioning issues for us came out of homework and turning in homework and doing the homework and repeating things, multiple times, and all that was a big challenge. And at the time, I think there wasn't as you say, a shared vocabulary about that, and so some teachers would be more sympathetic and others would be less, that say, hey, he didn't turn it in, so we got a 0. Well, it's in his bag. Can you ask him for it? No, it's his job. So, how do you think that awareness has changed, through your professional development? Do you think that you've actually moved the needle? Because it's great to have the parents, but if the parents are all speaking the language and the teachers aren't, then
Well, we started with the
haven't really gotten
teachers.
anywhere. Yeah, that's great.
But I think that a lot of it was just the feedback that we got. We did, February 12th of last year, we did 4 sessions, each an hour long, with staff across the schools in the district, middle and high school. And we had some staff who individually, after each one, would come over and say, so wait a minute, if I've got a class and I've got freshmen and seniors in it, you're saying I should have different checkpoints for long-term assignments? Yes. That's exactly what we're saying.
And honestly, Patrick, we heard a lot from the middle school teachers. I think it was very eye-opening, especially in terms of the way that brain develops, to see that there was not that much of a difference and what those expectations should or shouldn't be, and then how we can break it down. So if homework getting out of the backpack is the problem, then how can we help facilitate that? And so yes, I think it was really, really beneficial, and it started that language.
To see the struggle with homework or with organization not as a deficit, but as a developmentally appropriate stage that kids are going through that we need to guide them through.
Yes. Yep.
Great. Well, I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Any other questions before we? More questions in the back.
So just with my understanding of there are some skills that can be used at home to help students. I imagine that this could play into issues of the achievement gap then, of what some students do or don't get in the home. So are there extra efforts being taken to make sure that we reach our full diverse population in Princeton Public School District with these efforts?
To put it bluntly, no, not at this time. And I think when Meredith says that we're in the developing stages, it is really in its infancy in terms of the fact that curriculum was even built. So I think you're bringing up a very good point, that we also then have to get the resources out to all the families, some who may very much need them, to really make an impact.
But if you're also wondering just about advertising, for lack of a better word, for this event itself, it was in the special ed PTO newsletter, as well as the school's newsletters, as well as some of the local newspapers. Neighboring districts were also informed, and there is also supposed to be a robocall, if I have that correct, just announcing the event, so that hopefully we're reaching as many as possible.
In Spanish and English?
The robocall? I don't know, possibly. No, I believe the special ed PTO was putting something out in Spanish also.
Mhm.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
So, one of the things I think even through the high school that kids are facing today in terms of executive decision-making that I didn't face as a kid is all the distractions, electronics. Is there a part of your presentation about the parents being the parent in terms of the electronics?
All right, I'll share with you the new term that I learned. Most people are familiar with helicopter parents.
Yeah.
The new one that I just learned is lawnmower parent, which, and maybe you already know that one, but when you mow down all the obstacles in front of your child and the damage that that can actually do rather than serving a purpose. I think we do address technology in terms of it being a more useful tool at the older ages if there are those constraints on it. How many teenagers are going to forget their planner versus how many are going to forget their cell phone? So how can we use that to our advantage? But this is directed at parents in terms of what strategies they can take away, which I think also includes just some of the hindrances that they might face in the home that perhaps we don't face in school.
I could envision a different presentation on how technology has actually changed the brains of students, because there's a lot of research out there on that, and that would be an interesting conversation as well.
And know that we don't ignore it. I mean, technology is discussed and kind of what the brain does when it's linked into technology versus what it could be doing if it's not and doing other things. So that is talked about, but I can't say it's, directly.
I don't teach your age group. I teach at the high school.
Yep.
And my concern is, one of the big things we're facing at the high school is sleep deprivation.
Yep.
And I would contend that one of the reasons is executive functioning as to when to put that phone down and when to put that phone away.
Yep.
Okay, all right.
And something that, Steve, the comment that you said about saying that it's part of the
Developmental readiness, or
The
yes,
dev-
it's not a problem. It's a developmental step.
step,
Right.
saying that to parents is so eye-opening and incredibly helpful. I was in a welcome address by middle school counselors and advisors and wonderful educators like yourself, and they told us, if you are checking your child's backpack at night, making sure their homework
Right.
is in their folder, and if you are making sure that they do their homework and putting it in the right side of the folder, and if you're making sure that their books are actually off the floor and in their backpack, and if you're making sure that their gym shoes are in their backpack, and then they stopped and they smiled, and I was thinking, yes, 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 got it, and they said, you need to stop, because they are now in 6th grade and they need to fail at that, because now is a good time for them to fail because the risks are low. Because when they get to high school and they fail at these things, the risks are much higher, because sleep deprivation and things like that are going to make the risk
And I think
greater.
Sarah and Meredith actually covered that exact scenario in their presentation, and they will advise parents and teachers, because the same thing might happen in the back of a classroom as the kids are getting ready to go at the end of the day, to stop and help the students reflect, what do you need, in order to be ready for school? What are your classes today? Do you have gym? What might you need? Just so you're not doing it for them, but you're helping them think it through in their minds, because that's what helps them develop that skill.
It was a pivotal moment in the Spahn house, and thank goodness I heard it with my first child. And unfortunately, my second and third child did not get the benefits. Actually, they did get the benefits because I let them fail. It was a beautiful thing. But I can't applaud you enough. I think this is amazing work, and I think it's going to help parents so much to just see that it's a process. And
Yeah.
it's really, really exciting stuff.
I don't know.
Really exciting stuff.
Yeah.
Betsy, did
Right.
you have a question?
I was just going to say something brief, which is that we know job-embedded professional development that's ongoing is really powerful, and that you are local resources here for us, and for teachers who know you're here, and administrators who know you're here, and parents who now know you're here. I just want to thank you. I think that's a really wonderful benefit to our district.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. And Stephanie just mentioned to me that if we haven't thought of it already, we might want to videotape the presentation.
Okay.
So, and you know you're going to love that. Sarah, trust me.
Just bring
Yeah.
more theatrics. It's all good.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah.